We're following breaking news here on CNN. It's a scene that we were hoping not to see near the site of the NATO summit in Chicago. This happened just moments ago. I want you to watch it closely. All right, that is Illinois State Police and Chicago PD, Chicago Mounted Police nearby. They are pummeling those protesters. They're fighting crowds of protesters with batons near McCormick Place, where the president is hosting world leaders right now. The crowd was trying to push through the police lines. Protests earlier in the day were quieter, and they certainly are not any longer. They're not quiet any longer. So we've got CNN's Paul Verkaman, who is on the phone now and joins us. He's down in the midst of those crowds. Paul, what are you seeing now where you are? We heard the police saying, "Move west, move west." What's happening now?
Well, John, it's right now a stalemate. They have been trying to move the crowd out to the west, and there are hundreds and hundreds of Chicago police officers in full riot gear. The protesters who were in the intersection about a block and a half away from McCormick Place where the NATO summit is being held have basically just stopped in their tracks. Police are not pushing forward right now. They're not trying to move them out. They have been announcing over the bullhorn, as you said, to move west. It's time to disperse. But basically, we've got a standoff right here now, Don.
Hey, the Office of Emergency Management issued a severe weather warning for strong thunderstorms, possibly hail, winds up to 40, 50 miles an hour, heading to the Loop, which is where you guys are. Have you seen any indication of this weather coming through? Because that may stop some of this in its tracks as well.
Absolutely, Don. We have seen the skies get dark here as we move into the evening, and we have felt a stray drop here and there. We certainly have heard some of the thunder. So everybody in the crowd right now is clear that the skies could open up, and people have made reference to that. So they are bracing for the possibility of a storm coming soon, and possibly just with changing the weather could loosen up what right now is one colossal knot here at Michigan and Cermak in downtown Chicago. So
you said right now it's basically a standoff, and we have seen in waves as we have been watching it's peaceful, and then the cops stand their ground, the protesters stand their ground, and then it moves one way or the other, usually with the police having the upper hand. So this is sort of a lull now, and then it may fire back up as we have been seeing.
That's exactly right. We're just seeing a little movement right now to the west of officers in riot gear. Some of them also are state police marked by green stripes on their helmet. I don't know if they're going to loop around, but one thing that's clear that the officers have done throughout the weekend in Chicago is they sometimes will steal off a group of officers and move them on. And that's a way of, in a sense, keeping up the crowd and making sure that it doesn't get too rowdy. But again, the sort of nexus of all this is near Michigan Avenue and Cermak, and you can see the signs and the NATO war machine of global 1%, et cetera, Occupy signs, some of the black banners waving. But right now, with the exception, there is no violence here right now, and some people are sitting in the streets, but the officers in riot gear are not trying to move them out.
Yeah. And look, I mean, if we saw down the street, we don't have control of this camera because this is our affiliate WLS that's giving us these pictures. And you saw the line of police officers there. Not only is it Chicago police, there's also the Illinois State Police who are there as well. And some of the confrontations we have seen have been unbelievable. If we can keep these pictures up and then roll some of the other video as well of some of the violent moments that happened just a short time ago and just really caught us by surprise. It's hard to look at people who are getting pummeled like that, but that's what happened on the right side of your screen. And this happened maybe 30, 45 minutes ago when we saw this here on CNN. It is the top of the hour. I'm Don Lemon. You're watching the CNN newsroom. We're following breaking news out of Chicago where there have been some violent skirmishes and back and forth with police officers that you're looking at there to the right of your screen. Happened moments ago. To your left, live, you see police officers who are in combat gear, riot gear, trying to hold back and push back those protesters. Ted Rowlands live on the scene for us. Ted, what are you seeing? Ted Rowland, you there? Apparently, Ted cannot. As soon as we get Ted, we'll go to him. But again, this is what you're looking at. And I'm curious, I'm not sure if Paul or Ted, since they've been down in this crowd, if we've had any chance to do any sort of reporting here for the number of injuries, the number of people who have been detained, who have been arrested. And I would like to know that. And the crowd numbers as well. Ted Rowland's talking now.
Again, it seems as though we might be looking at a situation where...
Go ahead, Ted.
This is a phoner. Okay? Plug me into the phoner line.
All right.
Tell me to put it in the phoner.
So Ted is on the air. He's not sure that he's on the air. And so when we get Ted, for sure, we'll go back. Okay? Thank you. But again, this is live pictures, and this is from Cermak and Michigan Avenue, right near Lake Michigan in Chicago, the South Loop. And it's McCormick Place is where they're holding the NATO summit, and this is not that far away from McCormick Place. So police were trying to push people west. They were saying, move west, which is away from McCormick Place. West would be away from the lake and further into the city. And if they were to go east, they would end up in the lake, north or south. If they were to go south, they'd end up at McCormick Place. So just to sort of give you an idea of where they are in the city. This is as peaceful as we have seen it, as we have been watching these pictures over the last hour or so, maybe a little bit longer here. And you know, these police officers are not taking any you-know-what off of these protesters, and these protesters are angry. Both sides have been standing their ground. As I said earlier, we have the right to take to the streets. We don't have a right to throw things at police officers. We saw buckets being thrown at police officers. We saw water bottles being thrown at police officers. We saw a police barricade being hurled from the protesters into the police officer's side. And we've also seen police officers just pummeling people, and we don't know why. I don't know if the protesters instigated it or if they didn't. I don't know. I'm watching these pictures live just as you are, and occasionally getting information in my ear about what's going on. But I would like, if we can, have our desk check on some of the information to find out how many people have been detained, how many people have been arrested, how many people are actually in the crowd, what are the complaints, and how they plan to move these people out, what they plan to do with them once they move them out, why are they trying to move them west, to where. Have any officers been injured? I don't know any of that. I'd love to know that. Paul Verkaman standing by for us. Paul, what do you know?
Well, Don, some of this knot that we described for you has sort of been loosened up because they have moved a number of the demonstrators west now to Cermak and Wabash Avenue here in Chicago. I heard some of the questions you were asking, and sometimes when you're in the middle of something like this, looking from the inside out, it's hard to determine. We did not see any officers who were injured. Now, we did see, I would count about 8 people being treated on the side, not by any paramedics associated with the city of Chicago or an independent group. They were treated by the medics who were part of the overall rally. One man told me that he was struck 4 times by Chicago police with a baton. We have no idea of knowing whether or not he had provoked this or not. He also said, as you saw earlier, when people started picking up barricades, some people did get smashed. And one, I guess, silver lining to all this, I saw some of the shoving with the barricade, and it's just good fortune that nobody was pushed through the glass window of any of the nearby stores or restaurant. The situation right now, I can see Chicago police are pulling in some large vans now headed toward the biggest block of the protesters. And it looks like some sort of hazardous materials or emergency vans. I also can see that there's a Chicago Fire Department ambulance, again, toward that other area. So the attempt right now by police is trying to loosen up, as we said, this huge knot of protesters not too far from where the NATO summit's being held on.
Yeah, and thank you, Paul, for answering some of that, because those are the questions our viewers have at home. Here's the interesting thing. The cops are there to protect the people who are at NATO, but the people are there who are protesting certainly have the right to protest, but they don't have the right to be violent, and neither do the cops. So it's an interesting situation that we're seeing going on here. And if you see that, the one on the bottom of your screen on the right, I mean, it just, every time I see it, I just can't imagine being any of those people who are on the ground or in front of those police officers. My goodness. I don't know, does anyone deserve that? So that's what happens when you have these situations. Any sort of summit where you have leaders, anytime you have a major number of politicians who are in town for the conventions. Each convention that I've attended and reported, I remember being in Philadelphia, and there were anarchists and there were protesters, and the situations were very similar to what you're seeing now in that city. And this was back, what, in 2000? I can't remember, 2000 or so. And then anytime there is a convention or something like this with world leaders, with politicians, there are protesters who are angry about one thing or another, and some of it very legitimately. But we are watching this because the violence really has escalated in the last couple of hours, as you can see there on your screen. We want to listen in. This is live from our affiliate WLS. So what you saw there was a scuffle with one man. It looks like just one man and a number of police officers, and then here we go again with them trying to push back. And let me tell you this. This is our ground shot. We're going to listen.
Ted called 1411.
Okay, so you can hear the whole world is watching. The whole world is watching. Leads me to exactly what I was going to say before we listen in there. I know the whole world is watching, but I lived in Chicago. The whole city is watching. The police department, the brass are all watching at headquarters right now. They're watching at the Office of Emergency Management. And you can better believe they're telling their officers you're being watched. You're being aired live on CNN to mind your P's and Q's. I know that they're doing that. But it does appear that there is some situations that the police officers have either gotten themselves into or that the protesters have forced them to do, either way, that have played out on the screen for people to see, and the videotape will be looked at to see who caused what and what happened. CNN's Jessica Yellen there actually covering the business of this NATO summit in Chicago. And Jessica, they're talking about Afghanistan, they're talking about other things, and this is their backdrop.
It is, John, and you know, I have to say it's very quiet here inside the Summit Convention Hall. One of the major, the major focus here is Afghanistan, and what kind of commitments these countries gathered here will make in the next years to Afghanistan, when the president has said all forces will be drawn out by 2014. One of the big concerns, France, the new leader there, has said as part of his campaign pledge that he will remove all troops, all combat troops earlier, by the end of this year, than they were originally planned. Well, today, the U.S. has found an elegant way to spin that and say, well, guess what? Troops are already transitioning out of that region, and it's not such a big jolt to Afghanistan, and it's part of the transition plan anyway. That allowed the president, when he was meeting with Hamid Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, to say the world remains in full support of the exit plan from Afghanistan. Listen to this.
We are working with the Afghans over the next several years to achieve a complete transition to Afghan lead for Afghan security, one in which we continue to provide support for the Afghan National Security Forces that have made excellent progress over the last several years, and also painting a vision post-2014 in which we have ended our combat role. The Afghan war, as we understand it, is over, but our commitment to friendship and partnership with Afghanistan continues.
Now the next task is to find commitments from the other countries here, Don, for financial support going forward, some $4 billion total between now and 2014, and also to begin talks about what some kind of military support might look like after 2014. Don?